This is G-Free Radio. Here's your host, Peter Stewart.
Whether you're G-free or whether you're celiac or somewhere in between or just undecided, or maybe you're thinking there's a problem and you're wondering whether you should be going to a health professional, this is the G-Free Radio Show. Hello, I'm Peter Stewart. In this week's episode, what's it like being G-free where you are? Access to celiac diagnosis, professional help, friendly advice from people like you. What about food shopping or eating out? What's it like growing up with a restricted diet? Well, now think what it must be like in another country, a different language and a different culture, maybe hundreds or thousands of miles from home. In this week's show, hear what it's like being G-free in, of all places, the United Arab Emirates. And we hear from a London-based food blogger who's setting up a new find-me-a-local-gfree-restaurant app. It's got a name you'll never forget, and also, so much did I enjoy speaking with Kaz, we kind of wander off that topic a little bit and talk about what it's like trying to get G-free food in any restaurant. In Health Issues, we take a look at a possible connection between gluten and heart disease. We hear 5 reasons to avoid the gluten-free aisle, even if you are a celiac, and price is not one of the things that we're suggesting you may want to look out for when you're in your store or supermarket. We've looked at the alternative grains of buckwheat and teff in recent weeks. In this episode, quinoa. Bit of a superfood, isn't it? But where's it been all our lives? We tell you more about the low-calorie, high-protein grain and why we just had to bring you the information before December the 31st. So how are you? Thanks so much for joining us, and a special hello to all our new listeners and followers. It's really great to have you, and thank you so much for your kind words and thoughts over the past 7 days or so. Now, first of all, I thought I'd bring this to you because it's a connection between gluten and heart disease, and the person who's written this is via therealfoodforager.com, and it's certainly something, or a website certainly, that we've mentioned before, and this has come out of that rather fantastic gluten-free summit that you may have been aware of and you may have been following online. You may have bought the recordings or the book or the downloads or the CDs or something of that nature. And of course, a lot of those recordings were free, actually online, for a 24-hour period, a rolling 24-hour period, as it were, over 7 days. Really interesting stuff. I didn't catch as many as I wanted to because there was so much information. And to be honest, some of those lectures or interviews went on for quite a while, didn't they? Crammed with fantastic information. But we must get round to listening to those in a little bit more detail over the forthcoming weeks and months now that we've managed to download those. But Dr. Mark Houston is... and I take a big breath as I give you his title, Associate Clinical Professor of Medicine at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, Director of the Hypertension Institute and Vascular Biology, Medical Director of the Division of Human Nutrition at St Thomas Medical Group, and a cardiologist who specialises in nutrition. It's interesting linking those two together. The human body is a whole machine, isn't it? And to just specialise in cardiology, for example, or nutrition, well, why not do them both? Because everything is interconnected. Anyway, according to Dr. Houston, coronary heart disease, CHD, starts in utero when the mum is exposed to poor nutrition, malnutrition and toxins. Environment and genetics also play a role in the progression. In today's American teenagers, this report says, there's a 30% incidence of subclinical coronary heart disease. Contributing factors, well, this won't surprise you: obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes and a sedentary lifestyle. And this article goes on to say there are simply just too many people eating too many fast foods and frozen foods and not enough fresh vegetables and not getting proper exercise. Now, there's a correlation apparently between gluten sensitivity, which occurs in the gut, and celiac and metabolic syndrome. There's also a connection to vascular problems, endothelial dysfunction, coronary heart disease, congestive heart failure, and arrhythmias of the heart. And Dr. Houston was able to get 62% of his patients off medications with diet and lifestyle changes alone. He uses a diet I've not heard of before. It's called the DASH2 diet. It involves food with high potassium, low sodium, high magnesium, lots of veg, low glycemic fruit, as well as minimal to no grains or dairy. And the programme also involves lots of fibre, resistance and aerobic exercise, no tobacco or alcohol, and restricted caffeine intake. When the gluten-sensitive patient eats gluten, the body sees it as an invader and responds in 3 ways: inflammation, oxidative stress, and vascular autoimmune dysfunction. The blood vessel is an innocent bystander, and it develops disease in response to the assault from the response to gluten. It's gluten, this report says, that is the trigger. For example, Dr. Houston has found that idiopathic cardiomyopathy, or swelling of the heart, reverses on a gluten-free diet in gluten-sensitive people. He says any type of cardiovascular disease, such as coronary heart disease, myocardial infarction, congestive heart failure, cardiac arrhythmias, diastolic dysfunction, or stysotolic dysfunction, and many others, can be a response to the assault from gluten on the blood vessels. Now, it has to be said, there's an awful lot of words there that I don't recognise, but I'm getting the gist here, and hopefully you are as well. Essentially, gluten sensitivity may soon become a risk factor for heart disease. And just by way of conclusion, in this particular report, conventional medicine looks at the top 5 risk factors: blood pressure, cholesterol, and dysglycemic, or sugar metabolism, obesity and smoking, the 5 there. According to Dr. Houston, that's incorrect, he says, because 50% of the people with coronary heart disease or heart attack don't have those risk factors. The next phase is to redefine the top 5 risk factors and include others like gluten sensitivity, and that apparently is now being explored. You can read more about the connection, or possible or supposed connection, between gluten and heart disease at realfoodforager.com. It's Peter. It is the G-Free radio show. A little bit later on, we'll be telling you what you need to look out for when you go shopping. A blog which suggests don't go down that gluten-free aisle. Avoid it altogether. You don't need the stuff that's down there. You need to be going to another part of the supermarket or grocery store for your shopping instead. It's a little bit controversial.
Follow us on Twitter. We're at G-Free Radio.
Now, last week we heard about being G-free in Canada. We've had similar stories from people in the UK and the USA as well. This week, a different country and a different culture. What's it like being a coeliac in the United Arab Emirates? I've been speaking to Linda from Gluten-Free UAE, and here's her story.
Actually, I'm from Sweden to begin with, I have itchy feet. So I spent 12 years in the UK, and then my feet got itchy again, and I came to Dubai and met my husband and got married, and here I am. I've been here, it'll be 8 years in January. It's certainly different, and here you only have sort of summer and winter being like a British summer, I suppose. So it's dusty, it's sandy, not very green, but it has its charms, something that keeps people here. It's nice. It's different, but it's nice.
And it's your daughter who's got celiac disease, yeah? And was your daughter actually born out there?
She was born in the UAE. First we had my son, and then a couple of years later came little sister. And she was very, very angry and cranky. And I don't know. We were sort of like, we'd been smug parents before. We thought we were so good at this parenting lot because our son was very, very good and very, very easy. And then she came along and she was almost like a little monster. And as time went by, she became worse, not better. She didn't sleep, she didn't eat, she just screamed a lot, and then she started being sick a lot. Cutting a very, very long and horrible story short, just before her second birthday, she was diagnosed with celiac disease. And at that point, she'd been hospitalized so many times, I don't even know how many times. towards the end, she was in the clinic at least once a week on an IV because her potassium levels were so low from constant vomiting and diarrhea. And I'd never heard about celiac disease. And then eventually we got told that that's what she had. So that was a bit of a slap in the face. I knew people were gluten-free. I knew some people had an issue with gluten, and I knew what gluten was. I thought I knew what gluten was. But I'd never heard of celiac disease. I had no idea that there was something to do with gluten that was an autoimmune disease, which was different from an allergy I had no idea.
And how well recognised is celiac disease amongst the doctors, the health professionals there?
It took a very long time. Here, mainly, especially as an expat, you find that you'll see other expat doctors. So I think it was part of it was just a communication thing. The doctor we were with and we were quite happy with didn't spot it. And then when she was hospitalised, it was various different hospitals and so many different doctors. And I think had they all just communicated to each other, they would have figured it out. But they didn't. And we thought that all the things she was hospitalised for were different things. And it's only once we had the diagnosis that it became clear that it was all linked together. But she had other issues as well because she was born prematurely. She had RSV as a very young child, which premature babies should never have. It's very dangerous. So we just put all the issues down to other things all the time, as did the doctors. Had she had a diagnosis maybe a year earlier than she did, maybe today we wouldn't have the issues that we still have. She's better now, obviously. She's a lot better, but she still does have issues. And she has damage to her lungs from her, I think it's 5 pneumonias she's had, and she's only 4.
So the clues were there?
Oh, they were all there. When they say you should never Google, but obviously you come home with this. I was given a piece of paper and said, don't give her any gluten, good luck. And that's what they sent me home with. So of course I Googled, and I found a list of 22 symptoms most common to celiac disease patients. And the only 2 symptoms she didn't have were delayed periods and infertility. And at times she wasn't even 2. So, she was a classic child, classic celiac disease child. You could tick every single box of what celiac disease in children looks like, and she fit the profile. And it was just a shame then that I hadn't heard of it, because maybe if I had, Mummy would have asked the right questions.
And very often when you hear of something for the first time, you then keep hearing about it, don't you? It's like so I've heard when you're pregnant, you keep seeing loads of other people who are pregnant, or you get a certain car and you keep seeing that make of car on the road. So was it like that with you, that once you heard specifically about celiac disease, more and more people came out of the woodwork?
I kind of set out to find them because I knew that we can't be alone. We can't be alone in this diagnosis. We can't be alone in this huge hardship that we're going through at the moment. There must be other people out there. And I tried to find them, and I found that there was no resources here in the UAE. There was nothing. There were no websites, no information to be had on the internet. There was no group, no support meetings, nothing at all. And I just desperately wanted what every mother wants for her children, which is for them to feel normal. You can't feel normal unless you have other people around you that are like you.
So presumably there's no reason to think that people with celiac disease, the number of people, is any lower in the UAE than anywhere else. What do we actually know?
Until recently it was thought that Asians had a lower prevalence of celiac than other races, but recently research has been found to suggest that it's just as high. So, they do think now that there's a huge closet number here. And if we talk about Western countries where over 95% of celiacs are undiagnosed, the numbers here must be even higher in that case, because very few people who have it know about it. So, yeah, it's just starting to become more widely recognized and more diagnosed, but there's still a huge number of doctors that believe it doesn't happen to Arabs or Asians or, people from other races. People think it's sort of a Nordic countries thing or Northern Europe. And
what's the diet there? That's presumably wheat-based. I can think of a lot of breads and so on, but cake and pasta?
Well, they eat, the Arabic bread is served with every meal, and it's the most floury bread imaginable. It's covered in flour. And other than that, there's plenty of wheat in the food. It's probably not, I mean, it's different from our kind of food, but I wouldn't say there's any less. There's plenty of couscous and different things to what we might be used to, but still with wheat.
And what were you eating at home?
I've always been one of those parents that won't let my children eat out or eat takeouts or burgers. Very boring for them, but no, I would cook most of their food. So very sort of Western diet, lots of pastas and bread, of course. So yeah, that all had to change very, very quickly.
And we continue our conversation with Linda from Gluten Free UAE in next week's episode of the G-Free Radio Show. On the way, we're going to be talking about quinoa, and also we're going to be talking with Kaz Roberts. You may know her better as the gluten-free foodie. You know what? She's a bit of a food expert. She loves her food. That's her own admission. I'm not saying anything she wouldn't say herself. And she's also developed a website and an app that you can rate the gluten-free food that you get at various restaurants across the UK. But more than that, we had a discussion a short while ago, and it went from the app and the website and so on to other things, just generally talking about food in restaurants for celiacs and those on a gluten-free diet. And I think you're going to enjoy that conversation. Kaz is up in a few moments' time. First of all, here are 5 reasons to avoid the gluten-free aisle in your local store or supermarket. As I said earlier, it's a little bit controversial, and these words come from Dr. Amy Myers, courtesy of eatlocalgrown.com. And it's really interesting. It just kind of brings things back into focus a little bit, because very often, if you're anything like me, you always go down that G-free aisle, the free-from aisle. You have a little scan, you perhaps pick up your favourite food, you see where there's something new which is there, you know, the kind of thing I'm talking about. But first of all, Amy has been saying what's wrong with gluten-free foods, and, you know, I reckon you know this, but it's always worth kind of reminding ourselves. The problem with gluten-free foods, that they're very often very refined, more so than their gluten-containing counterparts. So in order to produce gluten-free flours, they've got to use other grains and starches. We know that, like flours made from rice, potatoes, corn, tapioca. How many times have we seen those ingredients in the panel on the back of a pack? Those flours are naturally free of gluten, of course. They're still highly refined grains. They can cause a spike in blood sugar higher than that of their whole grain counterparts. And gluten-free products are often very low in a number of vitamins and minerals: iron, folate, niacin, thiamine, calcium, we spoke about that a couple of weeks back, vitamin B12, phosphorus, and zinc. We spoke about zinc last week. And the views of Dr. Amy Myers, the 5 reasons to avoid the gluten-free aisle in your store.
1.
Gluten-free products can contain trace amounts of gluten. Well, we kind of know this, don't we? Even certified gluten-free foods can contain up to 20 parts per million of gluten per serving. It's a minimal amount of gluten if you only consume packaged foods occasionally. However, if you eat those processed gluten-free foods every day, you can potentially expose yourself to unwanted amounts of gluten. I know there's a big debate going on in the United States at the moment. Obviously, they are going to have 20 parts per million certified, but if you've been following the various blogs and tweets over the course of the last 7 days, you'll know that there's a bit of a discussion over in the United States about a beer, a lager, a drink that's been certified safe and gluten-free, even though it's 20 parts per million, if I understand that particular debate correctly. And a similar debate happening in Australia, where they've had 0, and now they're going up to 20 parts per million. And they're saying, well, that's not gluten-free. It's 20 parts per million. In the UK, we've got 20 parts per million. We came down to that. So we're in a slightly different situation, but most people seem to be okay. There doesn't seem to be that heated debate that there is for various reasons in other parts of the world.
2.
Gluten-free products are nutrient poor. Well, we touched on this a few moments ago. When grains are refined in the manufacturing process, many vitamins and minerals are lost along with it. Gluten-free products are considerably less nutritious than real wholesome foods, like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and a lean organic source of animal protein. And you know what? I reckon every free-from food manufacturer would say, yeah, absolutely. Of course, a muffin, a cake, a piece of bread is not as nutritious as an apple or a banana or a packet of seeds and nuts.
3.
Gluten-free products are high in sugar. Whenever an ingredient is removed from a food, it's often replaced with another ingredient for stability, shelf life, or texture purposes. For example, says the doctor, sugar-free foods contain sugar alcohols. Fat-free foods are often produced with man-made fats and extra sugar. Gluten-free foods are no exception to that rule. They're often laden with extra sugar. Excessive amounts of sugar can contribute to insulin resistance and weight gain and ultimately suppress your immune system. In addition, too much sugar can feed gut infections and lead to many more health concerns.
4.
Gluten-free products contain preservatives. Preservatives increase the shelf life of a product and ensure it's resistant to mould and bacteria. It's very convenient, of course, to have food that lasts months, but it adds unnecessary chemicals and compounds to your diet. Every food we eat was at one point a living organism. It might be a plant or an animal. It's very natural for our meat, vegetables, grains, fruit to decay after they've been picked or harvested. But the doctor says anything that can survive on your shelf for more than a week without a life source is unnatural and perhaps not something that you want to include in your diet. As we always say, just a report here. Yeah, I'm just passing on the information. What you do with it is up to you. It's not being endorsed by me specifically. I'm just alerting you to it.
5.
Gluten-free products are made with refined oils. Inexpensive oils are often added to many gluten-free products to moisten the product and improve the texture. Refined oils such as vegetable, canola, rapeseed, and sunflower oils are all high in omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory. A diet higher in omega-6 fatty acids than omega-3 fatty acids can lead to increased inflammation. So, what can you do instead? Well, I guess, as anyone would say, whether they're in the gluten-free food business or whether they're on the gluten-filled food business, get your energy from wholesome, organic, fresh foods, fruits, vegetables, raw nuts and seeds, grass-fed beef, wild salmon, pasture-raised eggs, all of those gluten-free by natural sources. And if you've already removed gluten from your diet, your body may be sensitive to other inflammatory foods. Maybe it's dairy, eggs, soy. You may want to consider going to a health professional to get advice from a qualified nutritionist on your personal situation about whether or not to take any or all of those out of your diet, and if so, how you'd go about doing it. But that report by Dr. Amy Myers, and that website, if you want to get in contact with her or read more about it, we've just given you a summary there. eatlocalgrown.com.
This is G-Free Radio.
G-Free Radio, and we're talking about quinoa in a few moments' time. But first, a new website and app that's been set up by my next guest. She's Kaz Roberts, otherwise known as the gluten-free foodie. She's developed a fantastic app and website called Gloogle. Do you see what she did there? And we had a great conversation. And here it is on G-Free Radio.
Gloogle is a place to discover and share all of the wonderful gluten-free restaurants, establishments that we've come across, everything from a place where you can find a gluten-free sandwich to where you can go, a fine dining restaurant, whether you be just gluten-free or dairy-free as well. There's lots of search options. And the idea is that everybody can begin to share the places that they've grown to know and love, that they trust.
This sounds as though it was born out of necessity that you came across. What was it that caused you to actually set this up in the first place?
Well, I know that people write to me a lot as the Gluten-Free Foodie, which is a London-based food blog. Some people are slightly frustrated that I don't review places elsewhere, but the point is...
There's only one of you, isn't there?
There's only one of me, yeah. So, and it was sort of frustrating because I wanted to pass on these recommendations from everyone. You know, there's a great hotel in Bournemouth that does gluten-free breakfasts or this or that. Really wanted to share the information, but couldn't do it all myself. So I thought, why not pass it back to the people so everyone can begin adding their own places. Other people can come and then review those, find that information, and it becomes a kind of community tool.
And your background is in website design and so on, so not only you've got a website, but you're getting it onto people's phones as well, so they can search when they find themselves in a city getting a bit hungry.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the app, which I must say, entirely selfishly, I have begun to use myself regularly. It's only been out for a short amount of time, but it was fantastic the other day. I was out in town, caught short, area I didn't know, had a look at the app, and sure enough, someone had added a great gluten-free place nearby that had a gluten-free menu, fantastic food. I was very well taken care of, and I was really happy. The idea is also, as you got your phone with you, you can also use that to start talking to businesses about getting in the gluten-free products that you want. If your local pub, you want them to start bringing in some gluten-free beers, but they ask that question, how is anyone going to know about it but you? You can show them and say, hey, I've added you. All the other celiacs that are out there now know that you're the place to go for a gluten-free pint. One thing that we're going to be starting to do is each week kind of run competitions and see who can be the person to add the most places to different areas. So, if you're in the northeast, if you're in Wales, dividing up the different areas, because, I can sort of go around and add as many places myself as I can, but I'd rather it really come from the people who actually live there and eat there all the time. And a new feature that we're going to be adding is a exclude chain restaurant button, just in case you know all the chain restaurants, you really want to find somewhere a bit more unique. You can flick that switch on and then you won't get all the chain restaurants.
What's your neck of the woods, and what have you found of note? If you were advising, say, a visitor to London, where would you say, you know what, this is not a chain, but it's down a side street, or it's somewhere you wouldn't think of going, or it's a really posh hotel, or it's a privately owned little restaurant tucked away up in North London somewhere? What would you reckon?
There are so many. There are places like Noppy, which I love, which is a kind of a bit of a, if it's your birthday or something special, someone's taking you out to dinner, I'd say go there. They actually bother to print up a gluten-free menu every day because it's a daily changing menu, seasonal food and everything. Really exciting and utterly delicious. And I really appreciate the fact that they bother to actually do a gluten-free menu every day. Obviously, I will say my brother-in-law's excellent gastropub, the Truscott Arms in Maida Vale, purely because I've been advising him, and our entire family is celiac. So my father, my uncle, my niece.
He dare not run gluten-free items. He'd be ostracised. He'd be drummed out of the Roberts family.
We have everything from gluten-free sausage and mash, amazing gluten-free gravy, Yorkshire puddings, 3 different types of gluten-free beer, so all that sort of stuff, and lots of good cross-contamination procedures to make sure everything's safe. And the excellent bread, I don't know if you've tried it, by Tom Thexton of Wild Thexton.
Ah, right, yeah. Well, I've heard of it, but you know what? There are so many breads on the market. I'd be the size of a house if I sampled every single loaf. But absolutely, I've heard, yeah.
The wonderful thing about Tom's bread is it's all fresh baked. It's really high standard. He used to work as a chef at the Fat Duck restaurant. So he's a major foodie and creates utterly delicious specialist breads. So he even does a gluten-free sort of imitation rye bread that's sort of nutty, and, he's a real wizard with the bread. So anywhere, actually, he serves into quite a few lovely restaurants as well.
Things have really changed, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting because I obviously review a lot of London restaurants. I am a major foodie myself, so I like to go try out interesting, nice places. And I was at one restaurant the other day. It was a nice restaurant. It was a Michelin star restaurant, and they brought out the bread. And I must say, I thought they were still purchasing and freezing, the old vac pack bread. Do you remember that?
Oh, heavens, yes. Well, it's not around much now, is it? I've been
No.
hard-pressed to find it, to be quite honest, especially in
Yes.
London. Good
I
heavens, there are so many places you can get the fresh ones from.
I thought that was my only sort of point to them was
Yeah, get with the programme.
wonderful that you've tried to cater to celiacs, but it felt like how it used to be 10 years ago, where you got your tiny little brick and you were supposed to be thankful for it.
So a few problems do still exist. And what about the wait staff? Because obviously they're the first kind of port of call when you sit down and you say, you take that big breath, don't you? And you think to yourself, oh gosh, what's going to happen now? Am I in for a battle, or am I going to be really pleasantly surprised? And you say, do you have an allergy menu? I'm gluten-free. In fact, do you say you're gluten-free, or do you say you're celiac? What do you find works best for you? Because obviously gluten-free can be misinterpreted as, well, it doesn't really matter. He's chosen to do that, and, doesn't matter about cross-contamination. Celiac, people kind of go, ugh. And if you were to use the disease word, they could be running for the hills.
I don't use celiac disease in general, unless I'm in somewhere like Italy, where they really understand that. You can say mi sono celiaco and they will go, oh, okay, because they're trained in that. I tend to go with, I'm allergic to gluten, technically not correct, but they understand allergy means watch out. Yeah. Gluten, they can start thinking. I consider myself a master face reader. I stare into that face and watch as I say the word gluten. And if a glaze comes over their eyes or a panic, you spot it. Do they understand Absolutely. What I'm talking about or not?
And also, don't forget the stopwatch. It's the time, isn't it, between when you say the G word and a reaction. Because if they say immediately, yeah, that's absolutely fine, or whether they wait a beat and then say, yes, that's absolutely fine, you think, okay, you're just saying that. Or
they say that's absolutely fine. They take your order and say, would you like some bread for the table? And then you go, oh, you've missed the point.
Isn't that the most annoying thing? You think you've got through, and then they come by again with that basket of bread and put it between you and your friend, your partner, your other half, or whatever, and you think, hello.
But that's what I really want to happen with Google, with the reviews, is I want someone to say, there's plenty of good gluten-free food here. I really love it. But watch out for the wait staff. Make sure you always ask for the manager, or the manager's very well trained. Those little bits of information. Even with the chain restaurants, the rating system in Google rates by gluten-free knowledge. You can rate that out of 5 stars. The gluten-free range, the quality of the food, and the atmosphere. So, you get a really good sense of whether or not a place is really up on their knowledge or whether they have a wide range, because you may choose to go somewhere that has a tiny range but great knowledge. And the one thing that they do have that's gluten-free is, fish and chips, which, we're obviously all myths. Part of the problem for them as restaurateurs is there are a lot of hidden celiacs. A lot of people go in and they don't say, I'm gluten-free, I'm a celiac. They simply order a salad with no croutons, or they order a steak. They're not vocalizing it. And I think one thing that would be really great with Google is actually being able to show a business, look, you're on this website. Now look how many customers you're getting. Look how many reviews you've gotten. You've actually got a lot of gluten-free customers coming in. You just never knew about it before, and why it's important for them to start bothering with the training, bothering with things like that, knowing that there is a huge amount of money. The gluten-free pound is a thing, because every time you go out to eat, sure enough, you're bringing at least another person with you, perhaps even a group, and everyone knows the gluten-free member of the group gets to dictate where you go.
Christmas party season, anyone? I mean, that could be a whole office virtually, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And they're also incredibly loyal customers, because once we find somewhere where we feel super safe, believe me, I'm going back there again and again and again. Everyone wants to go to the place where they don't have to, do the Mission Impossible sussing out the staff. And it's really easy to do, especially from the app. It geolocates you. So wherever you are, you're not going to have to fiddle about and type in the address or anything. And then all you have to do is just tap and rate.
Okay, and what are the addresses?
Very simple. It's www.gloogle.com, and Gloogle is Gluugle. And if you want to download the app, just simply go to the iTunes store, or there's a link from the website. And we're looking to do an Android version very soon. That's the next thing. But you can also use the website from any smartphone that has internet. The website is mobile compatible.
So, buckwheat, tick, teff, tick. This week, let's talk about another of those alternative grains that's been getting quite a bit of publicity over the past several months and more recent years. Quinoa, or quinoa, as some people say. That's fine. I've got to keep telling myself that it's quinoa, and it's spelled Quinoa. It's from Bolivia and Peru. The Andean highlands. It's a broom-like purple-flowered goosefoot plant, and it's grown on the barren hillsides there. And every spring it comes out, it's harvested, it's dried, threshed, processed through special machines, and the plant yields a golden stream of seeds, a protein-rich food that's been a staple of poor communities in the Andes for millennia. It's a low-calorie, gluten-free, high-protein grain. Its popularity, as I say, has exploded in the last several years, and its time has come. So, where's it been over the last decades? Well, agronomists have found evidence of its cultivation in the Mississippi Valley dating back to the first millennium AD, but it faded away after farmers opted for higher-yielding corn and squash and bean crops, and the WashingtonPost.com says enthusiasts started growing quinoa again in the 1980s, mostly in the mountains of Colorado. It's not easy, though. Sometimes it takes several seasons to get any harvest. The seeds can crack, the harvest can get overtaken by weeds or die because there's too much heat or too much cold in the summer or the winter. In 2012, the US accounted for a negligible amount of the £200 million produced worldwide. More than 90% of the world's harvest of quinoa comes from Bolivia and Peru. But what's driving that increase? Part of it is that Peru itself, already the world's biggest consumer of quinoa, patriotically started including it in school lunch subsidies and welfare programs and so on. And if you're intrigued for the reason behind my statement at the top of the show that we had to be talking about quinoa before December the 31st, it's because 2013 is the International Year of Quinoa. Who would have thought? To raise awareness of the crop beyond its traditional roots. Fill your boots with quinoa. Get it while you can. You know. Support the International Year of Quinoa. And meanwhile, in the Andes, the smallholders there trying to keep up with demand, they've put more and more land into quinoa in recent years. Bolivia had 400 square miles under cultivation last year, up from 240 in 2009. They've got an arid, cool climate, and quinoa loves all that, and not much else does, hence the success rate of growing that particular grain. And it means that it's pretty difficult to grow anywhere else. But that doesn't mean to say the rest of the world isn't trying. A Peruvian university has developed a variety that'll grow in coastal climates. There are also promising breeding programs for quinoa strains in Argentina, Ecuador, Chile. Perhaps you're not too surprised about those. But what about Denmark? That's trying to get a quinoa growing program underway. Pakistan. And also the Washington State University has been developing varieties for cultivation in the Pacific Northwest. And in August, there was a quinoa symposium bringing together researchers from all over the world to talk about their work. But the South American quinoa industry and the importers who care about it are worried about the coming worldwide explosion of their native crop. Because there's an increasingly strong demand, it's making it difficult for the Bolivians themselves to be able to afford to eat what they actually grow. but it's kind of every cloud and all that, hasn't it? Because it has boosted incomes from around about $35 per family per month to about $220, and it boosts their standard of living dramatically. But how are they going to maintain that steady income level when more and more people want the quinoa and there's more and more production around the world? Perhaps with places that can more easily and readily put in the roads and the infrastructure to harvest and transport and export the quinoa that's produced. It's very, very difficult, isn't it? But we're not really here to talk about that specifically. Let's talk about some of the multinationals. Are they interested in growing and using quinoa? Well, the US food industry has shown little interest in developing the ancient grain. Kellogg's, they use quinoa in just one granola bar. The PepsiCo company Quaker Oats owns a quinoa brand, but the biggest grain processors Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland say they've got no plans to start sourcing it. Monsanto, the world's largest seed producer you've probably heard about, has nothing either. Instead, their research and development dollars are focused entirely on developing newer, more pest-resistant forms of corn or soybeans or wheat and sugar and other staples. And all of those crops have got their own corporate lobbying associations, and they've got their own government subsidy programs and academic departments devoted to maintaining production and consumption. And against that, let's be totally honest, a few researchers and independent farmers trying to increase quinoa supplies don't actually have much of a chance. That's the history behind it all. That's the development behind it all, and a little bit of business as well. But let's go back to basics as it affects us, the actual users of quinoa. Quinoa contains all 9 essential amino acids. It's got somewhere between 16 and 20% protein, similar to milk, but apparently easier to assimilate due to critical essential fatty acids. It's high in iron, but that's not all. What about this? It's a great source of vitamin E and the antioxidant supporting mineral manganese. It's high in protein, fibre, magnesium, folate, copper, calcium, phosphorus, omega fatty acids, and also hydrobenzoic and vanillic acids, which apparently are good, as well as flavonoids such as quercetin as well. And the GuardianLV.com website says that quinoa is also got serious health benefits for people with diabetes as well. It's got a large amount of fibre, as we say, one of the key macronutrients needed for blood sugar regulation. Quinoa is a good source of protein, another important factor in controlling blood sugar. And along with its anti-inflammatory properties, quinoa makes an all-round diabetic-friendly food. It's also been shown to lower total cholesterol levels, maintaining good HDLs, making it a heart-friendly food as well. It's known to alleviate migraines and other aches and pains. It's almost a magical food, isn't it? I mean, boy, oh boy. It's known to relax blood vessels, and in South Africa, quinoa is used to heal skin injuries due to the high level of saponins. This is the G-Free Radio Show. We're nearly at an end, so we've got more from living gluten-free in the UAE next week, and also in next week's programme. Let me just give you a sneak peek of what's coming up. We're also going to be hearing from the woman behind the fantastically popular Foods Matter website in the United Kingdom. Her name is Michelle. I'm sure you've met her. She's been prolific in the food industry for several years, and we're going to be hearing from Michelle in next week's programme. We'll just leave you with one more thought. This is from Trisha Ryan of the Gluten Free Agency in Toronto. Well, she says, take one slice of bread, break it into 7,030 pieces. The gluten content in one of those pieces is 20 parts per million.
And that was the G-Free Radio Show with Peter Stewart. And you. Thanks for listening. And remember, until next time, be good, be healthy, and be G-Free.